Welcome everyone to tonight's BPMA event, Building Strong Partnerships Between Product Managers and Product Marketers. I'm Charlie Farrison, Co-Director of Programming for BPMA, and Steve Robbins, our President of BPMA and moderator for tonight's panel, will be kicking things off. We'll have our panel for an hour and then we'll have networking in breakout rooms. Go ahead, Steve.
Great, thank you so much, Charlie. We'll go to the next slide. At BPMA, we are all about helping people to literally transform the direction of their career through learning that inspires, and we do it in a welcoming community. We'll go to the next slide. The way that we do that is through monthly events, just like tonight's event. A lot of different content that will help you to learn new things, such as our Product Hub blog, as well as our mentorship program and our job board. In fact, we recently redid our job board and hope that you'll take advantage of that. We also partner with a variety of other organizations in the community, including Agile Product Open, Women in Product, and Product Camp Boston. And finally, we have the Product Executives Forum, which is an amazing place where executives from across Boston get together on a monthly basis to talk about some of the key issues that they're facing. So if you're not already a BPMA member, I hope that you'll consider joining. It costs just $50 a year, and that gives you a discount to events, as well as access to our Slack, our Slack instance. Also want to just very briefly mention that we're currently recruiting for a head of diversity and inclusion, a new committee that we've started at BPMA. And if you're interested, please let me know. You can respond to the email that you might have received for tonight's event, or find me on Slack at Steve and the BPMA Slack instance. BPMA is made possible only through the support of the broad community, but as well our sponsors and partners. Key sponsors include 280 Group, Pragmatic Marketing, or Pragmatic Institute, excuse me, and NDT. In addition, you can see a variety of other partners below that. And many of these sponsors have been working with us almost since the outset of BPMA, so we're very appreciative for their sponsorship. We'll go to the next slide. And with that, we're going to play a brief video from Pragmatic Institute. Again, they're one of our longest sponsors, and if you can just take a listen, that would be great. This video runs a little over 2 minutes, I believe. We're just going to cue that up. Here it is.
Pragmatic Institute offers a complete curriculum designed to help companies build and market products people actually want to buy. Our courses provide real-world insights, actionable best practices, and proven tools to maximize your impact. But how do you determine the right course for you? To start, everyone should attend Foundations. That's where you'll learn about the Pragmatic Framework and how to implement a market and data-driven culture throughout your organization. What courses you take after that is up to you and your specific needs. Need help with strategic product planning? Take Focus, where you'll learn how to determine the right strategies, how to get them approved, and how to present them to internal and external audiences. Responsible for product requirements? Then take Build and learn how to align product and development teams to create truly remarkable products. Need help setting go-to-market strategies? Check out Market. Learn to build buyer expertise and create strategic product marketing plans that build market credibility and deliver results. Not seeing the sales you expected? Take Launch and learn to create strategic launch plans and prepare the entire organization to turn your products into revenue. Or maybe you need to learn how to identify what the market is willing to pay so you can set the right price for each product in each kit. Then join us for Price. And if you need help better understanding the impact of big data on your business, join us for The Business of Data Science, where you'll learn how to harness the power of data science and artificial intelligence to make better decisions. There's a good chance you're responsible for more than one, or even all of these areas. With our flexible curriculum, you can focus on what you need most today and expand your skill set over time. So no matter where you need help, we've got a course, or 2, or 7 just for you.
And thank you, Pragmatic Marketing. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Kyle, who's going to give us a brief introduction to Product Marketing Alliance, our sponsor, our co-sponsor, or excuse me, our partner on tonight's event. Kyle?
Awesome. Thanks, Steve, and thank you, Charlie and BPMA, for working with us on setting up this panel. My name is Kyle Kiabyab. I'm one of the ambassadors for, I guess you could say, the Boston chapter of the Product Marketing Alliance. And what is the Product Marketing Alliance? Thank you. We're a global community, started up a little over a year ago, and now having reached over 11,000 product marketers on Slack. But throughout this previous year, we've taken strides to build out extensive membership resources, including templates, frameworks, and mentorship programs, including additional studies to explore the growth and development of the product marketing role and how that's been growing in the industry. So you feel free to learn more and join the Slack community at productmarketingalliance.com. We also have a meetup for the Boston chapter. We're still fairly young, and as a young organization, we're constantly trying to figure out new events and activities for product marketers and pretty much anyone interested in product marketing or working with product marketers in the area. So feel free to go to productmarketingalliance.com to learn more, or feel free to reach out to me as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kyle. And thank you again to PMA for being our partner on tonight's event. Much appreciated. So with that, I'd like to briefly introduce our panel. The way that we're going to do this is that in a second, the panel is going to go around and they're going to introduce themselves. But we've got folks tonight from Cambridge Mobile Telematics, and then two other pairs previously from Carbonite and LogMeIn, respectively. I want to mention that the opinions that you're going to hear tonight are really the opinions of the people that are speaking. They're not necessarily representing their companies in particular, since some of these folks no longer work at those companies. But I think that you'll find that this is really, this should be a very informative discussion. And I have to tell you that for myself, this is especially kind of ground zero for me, because much of my career has been spent in product marketing. And at the same time, I'm the president of the Boston Product Management Association. So I've had an unusual opportunity to really see all of this from two different sides of the coin. So these are the speakers. You can see them on the screen. We're going to jump to the next slide, and then we'll come back to the speakers in a second. But I want to give you a sense of how we're going to run this evening's event. So I've asked each of the speakers to go through and provide some introductions about themselves, their companies, and how they've worked together. We'll then talk a bit about partnership at a glance, the structure, division of labor, and whatnot. That'll be part of the introductions. And then what we're going to do is have this discussion through the product lifecycle. So first we'll look at it before and during development, and then we'll look at things during and after product launch. And then finally, we'll talk about soft skills that enable collaboration. Now, throughout tonight's event, you're going to have the opportunity to ask questions using Slido. I will mention that because there is so much to cover, there's a good chance that we're not going to be able to get through all or even many of the questions. But nonetheless, I would still encourage you to ask as many questions as you're interested in getting answers to. So please feel free to participate that way and ask away, and I will be stopping periodically to go and open it up to questions. So I'll be looking at different questions that are coming in. So with that, now that we've gotten that out of the way, so my friends from Cambridge Mobile Telematics, if you guys could give us an intro, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure, I can jump in. This is Isaac Judy. I'm a director of product at CMT, and I'm joined by Emily DiPietro. Do you want to say hi, Emily?
No, I'm good. Just joking. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily DiPietro, director of product marketing at Cambridge Mobile Telematics.
So now you know the best pair. No, I'm just kidding. The first pair that you're going to be hearing from today. So Emily and I go back a while. We used to work together at a prior company as well. And I can take credit for snatching her from that prior company when I also moved to CMT a few years ago. And let me just kind of describe the last two roles quickly, and I'll have her jump in. So in the last company, which was a company called Athena Health, it's a health IT company some of you may be familiar with. 5,000 employees at the time, pretty big, and would serve health systems. I was focused on a product that was geared towards messaging patients. So sending reminders around things like appointments, things like bills that were due, and also trying to get them to pay attention to results within the patient portal and really engage on their health. And we were sending automated emails, phone calls, and SMS texts. The way I worked with Emily was there was a kind of parallel product marketing organization that you can speak to a bit more that really helped reach the enterprise customers that we had and their users so that they could manage the administration of those messages and those campaigns that went out to patients. Emily, do you want to jump in and maybe add a little bit more about Athena, and then we can talk about CMT?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an interesting just thing to mention, since I think some product marketers over time can have different segments or focuses to the role. And so at Athena, I was really more focused on customer communication and marketing the product to our existing customer base and end user base as well, and managing things like issue communications, release communications, and anything under that purview, which is distinct from our current role, not to jump too far ahead, but our current work at Cambridge Mobile Telematics, which is a company that works on making drivers safer through using mobile sensing, behavioral science, and other technology to improve how drivers drive. And now it's more of a core product marketing function, I'd say, in terms of working with Izod on developing the messaging for his product. What's the story? What are the key value points that we need to be bringing to our all through the sales cycle and then to our current customers as well?
Yep, not much more to add to that. I think that sums CMT's kind of technology pretty well. So I'm focused, if this helps to explain certain things a little bit later, on a product where we use some of that sensor technology to detect when somebody's in a car crash, get them emergency help if they need it, coordinated through third parties like the service providers or the insurance company itself. And we typically work with auto insurance companies, but also other companies like telecom companies, ride-sharing companies, anybody who's interested in driver safety. And then a second use case for that product is around claims processing. So once somebody's safe, how do you facilitate the processing of a claim? And CMT is a much smaller company than Athena, from 5,000 to a couple hundred. So the relationships have been quite different. We can get more into that a little bit later. Also an enterprise-facing company, and also a company where we're trying to affect many app users. The analog to Athena Health was the patient. Here it's the driver. So some interesting, I think, challenges with marketing from, how do you reach the enterprise and its users, and how do you make sure you're delivering value to the end user, which you may not be interacting with as much.
Excellent. Great. Okay. And how, just really quickly, well, we'll go to the next pair. So, so our friends formerly of Carbonite, that would be Chris and Amanda, if you could just do a brief intro.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Bone. I'm now the Chief Marketing Officer at a company called Appneta, but we're talking about the time when Chris and I were both at Carbonite. At that time, that was between like 2012 and 2015. So going back in the archives a little bit, Chris was the Director of Product Management and I was the Director of Product Marketing. And we both had responsibility for kind of the entire Carbonite suite of products. And, the way we really thought about product marketing and product management in terms of the divvying up of duties, which I think is such an interesting question and is so different at every company, was really that product management owned product roadmap, UX, working really closely with engineering. Product marketing really owned messaging, positioning, pricing, and kind of go-to-market coordination. And the way that I like to sum kind of that relationship up is by sort of saying like product management is to engineering as product marketing is to marketing. And what I mean by that is that for us, at least, product management really defined what was being built and why, what value that was going to have for the customer. And then worked with engineering, and engineering was responsible for figuring out the how we were going to actually build that. Product marketing was responsible for really defining the messaging, kind of how we were going to talk about that value to the customer or prospect, and worked with marketing to really define the tactics or the how we were actually going to bring that to market and promote that, right? Where we're doing press releases, emails, all that good stuff. So I'll toss it over to Chris to maybe talk a little bit about some of our challenges and a little bit more about Carbonite.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Amanda. Apologies to everyone for my video troubles tonight. I shall remain masked, but good to meet you all. So yeah, my name is Chris Peterson, and I was at Carbonite for about 9 years, as Amanda said, 3 of which with her. Just for those that aren't familiar, basically it was data protection software, right? So we'd back up your desktops, laptops, servers, etc., to the cloud. That was the basic premise. And during the time that Amanda and I worked together, I think we probably worked on 5 or 6 launches of various sizes, something like that. Some were full-blown product launches, some are more feature related. And in terms of challenges, I think for us it was the company grew a lot, both in terms of people and revenue during those years. I think for us it was really just the fast pace and trying to always sort of balance this, both for product and for marketing, like how much to keep putting effort into remarketing the existing products versus trying to put effort into the new things and not trying to dilute the message or customer attention. I think that was something that was, we call it a good problem to have, but a problem that needs solving nonetheless, that we had to work through quite a bit. And then sort of just prioritization across the business. Like we went from a single product company when I started, and almost the same when Amanda started about a year later, to multi-product and multi-channel within the span of 2 or 3 years. So really trying to figure out where we were going to put our effort and try to maximize it, I think was a continual conversation for both our teams.
Okay, great. And then the LogMeIn folks.
Hi, I'm Oliver Young. I was the Director of Product Management at LogMeIn with Aaron Brennan, who was the Director of Product Marketing. And there we looked after LastPass, the password management tool. I think we were there together for about a year or so, a couple years back. And we thought primarily about how to drive adoption of that consumer product from within the LogMeIn family. For people who are not familiar with LogMeIn, in many ways it's kind of a holding company for a lot of products, and our particular product was LastPass.
Cool. Aaron?
And as Oliver said, my name is Aaron Brennan. I was the Director of Product Marketing for Identity and Access Management, which LastPass came under. And really, my goal was, how do we talk to our customers? How do we get them to engage with us? And how do we get them to continue to come back to us over and over and over again? So a lot in the messaging standpoint, who are our personas or users, and what was important to them.
Okay. And what were, Oliver and Aaron, what were the biggest challenges you guys ran into?
I think the biggest challenges for us were not so much with each other as with the rest of the organization, which is kind of a funny one. Aaron and I share a lot of corporate DNA, and when we were thrown in together as partners on LastPass, we had a pretty easy rapport right from the beginning. We had a pretty well shared understanding of what the product management, product marketing relationship should be. For us, the product manager owned working with engineering, UX, owned the roadmap. The product marketer essentially was the strong advocate in the room for the customer. So we spent a lot of time upfront in the planning process thinking about what that product should be, what the roadmap should be together, with Aaron as a strong voice for the customer and the customer research and their needs. And in my case, thinking very hard about what we could actually afford, what we could ship, what the engineers could do, and so on. So our rapport was actually quite good. Some of our biggest challenges were actually with convincing the rest of the organization that that was the right way to go. We were a bit of an odd pair for the rest of the company.
Okay.
Yeah, to give a little background there, Oliver came from Twitter and myself came from Google, which the DNA of those companies are actually very similar. because of the overlap of people that went from Google to Twitter or Twitter to Google. So the infrastructure of how our idea of what product marketing and product management were, we were able to hit the ground running really, really fast and come to an agreement as to what we needed to build, what we needed to focus on, what metrics were most important. But for us, it was getting the rest of the organization to follow that lead. That ended up being kind of the biggest challenge for us. A lot of that had to do with the rest of the organization was very siloed, where they had their own metrics, their own goals that didn't necessarily align to what Oliver and I looked at for, let's say, the product goals and what we saw as sort of a declining active user base, things like that we needed to grow and make very healthy.
Okay, got it. Great. So let's begin to talk about the product life cycle. And I'm going to start with Aaron and Oliver, actually. So how did the teams or your team work in terms of planning for an upcoming release? So how did you, and also, I mean, you talked about roadmap. It sounds like it's all, rainbows and unicorns and stuff, but I'm sure there were conflicts. So, and I know that both of you have strong opinions on things. So how did you resolve those issues? And how did you help your team to resolve those issues?
The first thing that we did right from the beginning, just because it felt very natural to both of us, was establish an objective and key result framework for the product. And we were both new to LastPass, so we were starting from scratch. And at least in my case, I reached back to what I knew, and sitting down and thinking about what are you trying to accomplish? What are the metrics that are important to you was a really fantastic grounding for us. And we really built those side by side with a couple of the other product managers. We sat down and said, what do we want this product to be and how do we want to measure it? And I think that got us off on the right foot. And even just simply sitting down and talking through what those metrics should be, coming to an agreement that that was the right thing to prioritize, and at times arguing about what not to prioritize. I think that was really the big first step for us. Aaron, are you gonna?
Yeah, and we certainly argued about stuff. I mean, we would certainly argue even outside of work. Late night phone calls, dinner at Oliver's house. So we argued about what we thought was best. But I think creating those goals was very helpful. So we really looked at sort of what activities need to happen within the product in order to create the healthy product. So we knew we needed to, increase registrations. We knew that we needed to increase daily active usage. We knew we had to increase product adoption. And we had to increase revenue. And so we had underlying goals underneath those, like how many registrations, how many sites does the average person log into? How do we move those metrics up into the right? And so Oliver was really focusing on that from the product side, and we would say like, well, how big is this market if we're building this function and feature? Is this the right size market? And those were the conversations we had before they even went on the roadmap.
Yeah.
Okay.
The product, it was largely a continuous releasing process. So we didn't really think so much in terms of releases per se, but in terms of features. And we could turn those on essentially on demand through feature flagging and things like that. But we spent a lot of time really massaging that roadmap and making sure that it was right, and at times yelling at each other about what we thought the right things were to place on that roadmap.
Yeah.
But when it came down to actually choosing the features, it was fairly straightforward, I think.
Yeah, our chief product officer actually pulled me aside one day and was very concerned because he thought Oliver and I didn't get along, and he was very concerned that his two product leads were not getting along and arguing in a Slack channel. But I told him, I was like, well, I was at Oliver's for dinner on Sunday night. It's just arguing and passion around the project. So
so the good news is you had the same OKRs. You'd agreed to those together. You're shooting toward the same thing, but how would you resolve issues when they came up? Like, I mean, for example, it would be very easy for somebody in product management to say, look, I own the roadmap. You brought good customer input, but at the end of the day, one person has to own the roadmap. It's going to be me. So how'd you resolve those issues? Like when you're having a disagreement, how did you get to conclusion?
I think there were a couple things going for us. First is we're both incredibly stubborn people. So that meant that neither of us was going to just kind of roll over. And if I tried to play well, it's my flippin' roadmap, that card didn't really work, which made a big difference. The other thing is we were both very grounded in data, and we had a fantastic head of data at the time who'd set us up with just a great stream of customer data that we could tap into. So we were really able to ground those conversations in what we were seeing in the actual customer behavior and in those OKRs and those goals that we were trying to achieve in the first place. And that often broke the tie for us when we were really struggling and couldn't come to an agreement. Digging deeper into that data, interrogating what our assumptions were in the first place, that was often what did it. That and just continuing to kind of work the problem to its final end.
And just to be clear, Oliver is stubborn, I'm not.
Okay. Okay. Well, this is, thank you, gentlemen. So let's talk about how product management and product marketing engage with other stakeholders, because we've already covered the fact that there's a whole lot of different folks. So, how do you engage with other folks to inform the roadmap? So if Izad and Emily could address that, that'd be great.
Sure, Emily, do you want to take a stab first this time?
Absolutely. So I think one big thing is that I would say product management at our company primarily owns the roadmap. And one of the ways that, and I didn't mention this earlier, but I am the only product marketer. And so I support all of the products at our company. And one of the key things that I look at when the roadmap has been developed or as it's in discussion is, as Izad alluded to earlier, the downstream impacts of who that feature will touch and how it's going to get to them, right? So it's a lot of communication with our customer success group, our sales group, our program management group to understand things. So for example, we have a fleet product, right, for fleets of vehicles. And to get to a fleet, you have to go through our primary customer and then to the manager of that fleet business and then down to the driver. And at every step of the way, you're going to need a different message for that persona, right? And so as part of the product development kind of cycle, I'm also thinking ahead to how am I going to support this in terms of making sure adoption comes down the line. And that really comes from our people on the ground talking to customers, as well as, of course, us talking to customers as well. What else do you have, Izad?
Yeah, thanks. I would say that that's a big part of it for sure. So getting the message out effectively through those different channels. One difference from what I think Aaron and Oliver were talking about is I think we've recently adopted an OKR framework, but it's a little bit different in an enterprise company in my experience, where a big part of the revenue that comes into the company involves relationships with enterprise customers. So similar at Athena Health and my last kind of enterprise company. And so you certainly prioritize those enterprise customers in terms of the users they bring, and you think about generalizing features to appeal to many of them and to attack new markets. But a lot of it is just a big part of my day-to-day job, and I think Emily's and people in other business-facing functions is trying to empathize with those customers, and there are different groups within large enterprises. We work with Fortune 100 companies, and so I'm talking to kind of fellow product managers. I'm trying to understand their perspective, and then there are the data people at those companies, and then there's the marketers, and then there's the engineers. And Emily is kind of interacting with many of the same folks, but across the company. So she's working beyond my particular product, for example, thinking about all of the products, taking in requests for information from some of our new prospects. So it's a lot of regular coordination with different business stakeholders and customers to try to prioritize that in a more qualitative way. I wish I could say that it was very quantitative and we just had a simple OKR and we said, that's the one, and we just kind of go after that. but it's a little bit more challenging, and at least with our enterprise business models, where we would serve so many different kinds of customers and at such different scales, and in such different markets, like the fleet market versus a general insurance company which might have millions of users. It's a very different relationship and way of reaching that customer. And so it's a regular partnership with Emily, and she gives me kind of that global view in a way that's very hard for me to get, because I'm talking to the engineers about very specific problems, or talking to certain customers about problems, but rarely get that kind of view across the board.
So I mean, what's fascinating about this is that it's very common for the ratio of product managers to product marketers to be probably like 3-to-1, if not much higher than that. And so it's interesting how the product marketer can give you that broader perspective. I think that's like across other product lines. It's really, really very interesting. But I mean, Azat, it's got to be like, how do you, at the end of the day, you can only build so much. How do you prioritize what you're going to build? Like when you've got all these different competing priorities, how do you decide?
Yeah.
I realize, I mean, younger company, this is
Yeah.
not, Health, but.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely like partly a function of the size of the company. We've grown a lot, and Charlie's been at CMT a little bit longer than I have. They were actually the first product manager, and it's we've grown exponentially in a few years. A lot of what drives our prioritization is, in my view, like where is there the biggest revenue opportunity in terms of the size of the customer, and we think about those large customers and try to triangulate their needs. And then in terms of the products that I manage, a lot of them are very data science centric. So there is a way to quantify their performance. And so that's kind of the other very roadmap centric view that we take, is how do we, interest these customers and meet their different business problems. And then, when we're delivering that product, is it really accurate, and is it really what they need? As long as we strike those two, it's the kind of the soft skills, and then the data actually works. It tends to work pretty well. Okay,
cool, awesome. And then Emily, I guess kind of a similar question. How do you prioritize what you're gonna focus the marketing work on?
Great question. It's a lot of everything all the time, but I would say our products. Well, I keep an eye on, I would say, all of our products, and I have bi-weeklies with most of our product managers. Some of our products come to the forefront at different times in terms of how they'll touch the external market as well as our customers. So I'll usually switch my priorities based on what's being worked on that'll directly impact our customers in the coming, say, quarter or couple of months. And a big part of my role as well is, we really started the product marketing function at this company a year ago when I moved into this role, is developing evergreen content across about all of our technology, and really getting that. So not just working on what's coming up soon, but also what do we already have, and how can I build out content for that as well, and messaging for what we've already got.
Oh,
so
good.
It's shifting content, it's shifting priorities. I would say on every 2 months, it just head down, focusing, and then seeing what comes up next.
Excellent. Okay, great. Thank you. So
Steve,
now that we've talked about, go on.
It's interesting. You had suggested that like a 3-to-1 product manager to product marketer ratio would mean that the product marketer has a broader purview and can see more.
Yep.
I actually hate that. Like, I really wish that my product marketer were just mine. When Aaron was introducing himself, he reminded me that he actually had other products. I always blocked that out of my mind because I hated that. And in my experience, if the ratio is wrong, what ends up happening is the product marketer kind of gets forced into the blog post writer, sales enablement, deck creator role, and actually doesn't have the capacity to go get involved with other parts of the product flow, and isn't that advocate, and isn't that person sitting there thinking about the customer. And I actually hate that ratio is what it is. And that's always been my experience, but it makes me mad. I I'm curious why you see it as an advantage.
Well, yeah, so I was kind of trying to make the best of what's not always the ideal situation. But I mean, I do think that, you know, if there are fewer product marketers, they're going to see more of what's happening. And that's what the folks from CMT were just talking about. But yeah, it often, as a product marketer, it definitely feels frustrating that, like, you know, your product management counterpart can go really deep into the product and know all the inner workings and know the users backwards and forwards. And as a product marketer, you're running all over the place trying to get into, you know, trying to understand everything. And and at the end of the day, you can't. So I'm curious, what have other folks seen for ratios? Like, just, we're jumping a little off script, but I'm just curious. The folks on the panel, what have you seen for ratios?
So the most successful products that I worked on, we had almost a 1-to-1 ratio, product marketer to product manager. And the product marketers on my team knew everything about the product. They knew everything about the user. They were so deep. They were really experts, and, you know, sitting side by side with the product management team. So we did not have that set up at LogMeIn, although we were trying to work towards it to get that sort of one-on-one relationships, because we did find that there was a little bit of a gap between the message that we would ultimately like to go out, because we just didn't understand as much as we would hope through lack of time. And, you know, there's only so many hours in a day.
Okay, got it.
I mean, I do think the 3-to-1 holds pretty true as I think about my experiences. I think, you know, the perk of that, as you mentioned, is that as we're thinking about go-to-market planning, we can be less siloed because we have maybe a greater understanding as product marketers of all of the various pieces that could be coming to market that month or that quarter, to be able to, you know, really integrate those communication plans. But I mean, certainly the flip side, which I think we all have felt, is you're pulled in more directions, right? It's difficult to go deep. And so I think that's a pretty common struggle.
Yeah, and I think something I'd say in terms of a benefit of having a broad range of products to work on is a cohesion of the message across all of the company's suite of products, and being able to identify trends and what we're talking about across products, because it's often the same customers for us who are hearing different product messages, right? And so understanding what the customer, it's just one customer, say, hearing everything that we're developing, so the story should be cohesive and to some degree, right? Even if we're talking about different products. And so I also find it helpful to identify, say one of our products in development is going to touch a user persona that I've worked on for a different product. I might say, okay, well, here's what I learned over here that we should get ahead of for this new development. So it's certainly great to have the depth where possible, but sometimes that breadth can help with identifying those trends.
Right. And actually, I mean, this is, by the way, I think the lack of one-to-one relationship is probably one of the biggest issues that product marketing faces today, and a major frustration for people in product marketing. That's like pretty universal, I think. So, okay, let's we'll keep moving along. So let's talk about while the product is in development. So what are, let's get down to some brass tacks. What are some of the meetings, and I'm going to address this one to Chris and Amanda. What are some of the meetings and touch points that product managers and product marketers use to stay in the loop on each other's activities? And who drives which activities? And how often are you, or were you talking together?
This is Chris. I would say that we were probably, Amanda and I were certainly talking daily, if not more often, probably more than both of us like sometimes, but not all the time. I'd say our teams were probably at least several times a week, depending, and closer to launch, probably more active than that. Sort of on the last topic, I think when we were a smaller company, we certainly had a different ratio. I think later on we got to be more of like, we tried to keep it one-to-one product marketer to product line, and the product line might have multiple product managers. That's kind of how we dealt with the division. But at that time, I feel like we had kind of like one product marketer assigned to each launch. And Amanda, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's like, sort of felt like you wanted to have one person sort of like own a launch. And that person might float around a little bit, depending on what was going on. But leading up to a launch, the PM and PMM teams to be all the time. So, certainly if there's any changes to roadmap or anything leading up to release, obviously you try not to do that the closer you get, but we'd be in lockstep. It was not uncommon for product marketers to show up to sprint demos pretty frequently, leading up to a launch, during development, just so they can understand and ask questions about the features that you're talking about. Sometimes they'd come to stand up too, sort of dependent on the person if they really want to kind of get in deep and understand how things work, but that was probably a little bit less common. Amanda?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think on, thinking from the other direction, product management might drop into some of our kind of marketing meetings where we were thinking about how we were going to actually go to market with this product or feature or whatever, to provide technical expertise, just to stay in the loop. I think that the thing that was most critical for us was, especially because of the kind of vast nature of the product suite that Chris and I and our teams are responsible for, was just really like product management and product marketing had to be two sides of the same coin, and like really just in lockstep with one another throughout this whole process. And so that meant, we'd really keep each other in the loop about the meetings that we were having and the progress that we were making towards bringing these products to market. And if it made sense for the counterpart to drop in, then they would. If it didn't, they wouldn't. But we really wanted to be transparent about what was going on, because frankly, that was the only way you could manage it, just because there was a lot in flux at any given time.
So it sounds like you were like, did you need to tell each other that you're going to be in a meeting, or it was just like, if one of us is in a meeting, the other one is welcome, or like we're peas in a pod, we try to keep in sync with everything?
I think we just tried to keep in sync. I mean, I certainly never felt like, I was Chris's shadow or he mine. I think that people generally thought of the product marketer, product manager relationship as pairs. And so, the questions we would get, like if I was thinking if, our PR team wanted to meet with me, they would say like, do you think we should invite Chris or, whoever from Chris's team? Like, it was just sort of known that there was value that could be brought from the dynamic of the duo across the organization. And so it never felt like, oh, I have to go invite the product manager. Chris,
Okay.
What's your perspective?
Yeah, I'd say the same. I think because we were the functional leads, like we were probably in every meeting together, or a lot more meetings together than maybe our team was, simply just because we had to kind of oversee everything. But I think at an actual individual product, product line level, product launch level, people on our team, it was probably more the dynamic you talked about, where it's people kind of knew who to bring to which meetings for which topics. And I still think there's a ton of overlap and people trying to work together wherever they could.
Okay, cool. By the way, too, I have to step back and say, what I'm hearing, I mean, these are really, for the people that are in the audience today, these are just a lot of best practices that, like, I'd be taking furious notes. I mean, the way that these teams have worked together, this is not something that happens everywhere. And this type of collaboration is really great, even as it takes different forms. So good stuff. I appreciate everybody's sharing. So Amanda, again, could you talk a bit about what the go-to-market and launch process looks like? And again, how do product marketing and product management collaborate? And you've alluded to a little bit, but if you could dig a little deeper, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing for me is that I think oftentimes we think about go-to-market as what happens when we're 2 weeks away from launch or a month away from launch, or pick your time frame based on your company's release cadence. But it's like, okay, the thing's built, now we need to go tell people about it. And yes, that is a really important part of go-to-market. But I actually believe, and sort of how we ran things at Carbonite, was that go-to-market actually begins much earlier than that. And so I think what was part of what made us so successful was that we had this frequent communication and collaboration really from the discovery process onward, right? So when we were thinking about, product management would say, we think there's something we need to build that we're hearing requests from our customers for, there was a product marketer involved in those discovery sessions, right? We had, product management, engineering, product marketing, and that triumvirate, in combination with our user research team, was doing customer interviews, was doing the research about what the competition is doing and what willingness to pay might be. And so starting that early meant that the go-to-market process in the traditional sense, right, when we're actually ready to start telling people about it, went so much more smoothly, because instead, of having it like, okay, now product management needs to tell product marketing what the heck to put in the press release. We were already involved because we were part of actually creating that. And I think that that's something that was fairly unique actually to how we did things at Carbonite, but that was really essential to being able to manage the process for us.
Okay, excellent, good stuff. Great. So let's kind of take a parallel view from Oliver and from Aaron. So for you guys, who owned release and who owned launch? So I realize that there might be a simple answer, but I'm going to guess there's some color you guys can add to that.
Yeah, so when it came for release and launch, prospectively, Oliver owned release and I owned launch, right? So when the product was ready to go, Oliver released it out. And then, when it was ready to launch, I would go through what Amanda was talking about, that go-to-market process, and really, do the communication around it. But like Amanda said, we were in lockstep that entire way. Before it even went on the roadmap, I knew what was going on the roadmap. When it was in design, I knew what was going to happen. We would do design reviews with the product management team. So I knew all that things coming up. The nice part about a lot of our releases was, our releases and our launches is we'd sit down and Oliver and I would go over the release and what was going to happen. And then I would sit down with Oliver and go over the launch. And we really kind of did it in lockstep and both had the same agreement on sort of, hey, what are we doing for this release? And then, hey, how are we going to launch? And do we agree that this is the best way to go? And that really helped because it gave me a sort of different perspective as we would sort of do these launches and releases and things like that and seeing different areas. And then it just made sure that we were on the same page as far as, what goals did we want to accomplish, right? And what kind of impact was that going to make on our product OKRs, bringing this to market. So.
Great.
I do think it is, when it gets down to it, like the actual decision of like go or no go on a product, you end up with tough calls. No product is ever perfect. They all have flaws. Frankly, if they don't, you probably waited too long. So when it got down to launches, and I think in our time together, we had one really big one. And there, the process of actually sorting out, are we ready to go, was a little tense. And there were definitely some argument of, you're fouling up my product and you're fouling up my launch, and trying to put those two things together. And like, do we really care about this bug? Are we going to sit down and hold the whole thing for it? And we've got this sort of communication lined up and these emails are ready to go. And we've promised this reporter, and I can't believe you're going to flip and do this to me. Like, it definitely got heated, especially for big launches. But I think that's part and parcel of just going through the process of making those tough calls together.
And how do you, I realize that some folks may actually not be familiar. What is the difference between release and launch? And actually, how do they sync up? How did you find that you were syncing them up from a time standpoint?
Yeah, for us, release was essentially turning it on for users, and launch was making the public aware, and that usually involved a blog post or talking to reporters and things like that. So in our case, we had a kind of a test-driven or experiment-driven development model where we were turning things on for small percentages of users long before we ever, quote unquote, launched them. So we were kind of slowly releasing things, turning that valve a little bit, seeing how things went. And then we would line up the big jump. So if you could imagine you've turned on a feature for 1% of people, you see how it's performing, you ramp it up to 5 or 10%. There's the possibility that if people are interested in your stuff, that actually makes news in and of itself. But the big jump from say 10% to 100%, that was kind of the big release and the big launch. And we would kind of do those things. We'd kind of turn both keys on the launch panel and hit the big red button. And he would send out the communications, and I would kick it up to 100.
They're roughly at the same time. Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody-
Almost
Yeah.
identical.
And I don't think there was any. I think there was maybe one time where the launch and the release and the launch were not on the same day that we were planning for, and that mostly had to do with just sort of the constant communication between Oliver and I on where things were. But for the most part, we really the day it released was the day we launched, unless there was some sort of big question mark. The nice part about the sort of testing metric that we had from a product marketing standpoint is as people would start to use this new feature that was coming out, Oliver and I were obviously in touch and sort of how are people engaging with it, and we would get a real sense of how big this feature would actually be and what kind of impact it would have on the market. We kind of had assumptions going in because we would do the market research beforehand of, hey, how many people have this problem? So we knew that, but you really get sort of that qualitative, how excited people actually get from it when you see people using it. So it was, much easier for us to say, hey, this is going to be a big one. So.
Okay, got it. Good. And talking about product launch, Chris, could you just really quickly describe what made a with your most successful launch, what was it about the collaboration between the two of you that made it so successful?
Sure. Probably the one that stands out the most back then was, so brief context for Carbonite. We started out basically protecting your laptop, your desktop, your home computer. And then as we went into small business, we started hearing people asking for it. Well, can you back up the other things in my office? So more complex IT environments, things like servers, application servers, domain controllers, all that kind of stuff. And the original Carbonite product wasn't really built for that on a couple different dimensions. So we came out with a new product that was effectively the server edition. And I feel like, sometimes you do your job well, or you get lucky, or some combination of the two. But with that particular one, a lot of the other competitors at that time were relatively expensive to where we were going to price it. They were hard to use, and this is back in the time when most people's servers were still in the actual office, not in the cloud. The things that we're doing the backup would typically back up on site as well. So if the building burned down, it didn't actually help you in any real way. So our product actually was one of the few that did on-premise and to the cloud. It was all kind of integrated and easy to use. So like that sort of trifecta of being able to pull those things together, and then from obviously a feature and workflow standpoint, but then being able to highlight those points with Amanda's team and really drive it home through the couple different channels that we launched into, I think is really sort of what made it pop. The actual launch itself, I think, so Amanda's earlier point, was born out of a lot of work that went into it months before, right? So seeing that opportunity and what things we were going to need to sort of like point out, and making sure that as we've talked about on the panel, like some things get cut at the end, it's hard choices, but like making sure we stuck true to the things that were actually going to be the key differentiators and like what was going to make us really pop at the end, versus like, yeah, it's not great, but we'll get it back in a month or two and no one's going to know this kind of stuff. Working through those decisions and always kind of keeping it like, it's not just what's easy for engineering or what product would prefer. It's like, well, how does the message actually hold together? If you start knocking legs out of the stool and your launch messaging used to have 3 great things that all work together, and now it's sort of one of those messages remains, you're not going to have anything there.
Okay. So we're supposed to end this part at about 8. I'm going to try to go, we're going to finish this by no later than 8:05. So for panelists, I'm going to ask you to be really brief in some of your answers. And we've got a bunch of questions that have come in from folks that are attending. So really quickly, for the folks from Cambridge Mobile Telematics, how do you folks juggle customer requests and questions about implementation as they affect rollout and future development? If you guys want to just take like a couple sentences on that.
Yeah, I can be brief because I think we've alluded to it a little bit earlier. I'd love to hear the questions. One measure is just where is the most revenue potential. So if we do constantly seek new relationships with large enterprises, and despite the best laid plan, sometimes somebody shows up sooner than you'd expect and says, hey, can we start working with you with this very aggressive deadline? We will change things accordingly. The other is if there's a new market opportunity, like something completely different, like I was mentioning, ride sharing, or a big new fleet opportunity or something else, that often gets a lot of attention too, because even if, with the best plan, it gives us diversity and really broadens the business.
Okay. And okay, great. So thank you. So one of the questions that came in, I'm going to be a little random with some of these, is what are some anti-best practices that you've encountered while testing different product marketing strategies and tactics? So I guess that would be kind of worst practices that you try to avoid. Anybody want to grab that?
I know Aaron has some worst practices.
You guys are too good to have had any
Yeah,
worst. I've seen other people do.
Yeah, I've definitely had some worse practices. One of the things is doing a launch without ever talking to a customer before we launched. That was just disastrous, right? Like, that doesn't work out very well. Some of the other bad practices that I've had is not having a great relationship with my product management team. And so what happens in that scenario is basically product management just throws something over the wall, and then I got to take a square and try to fit it into a circle and be like, oh, this is what I assume is happening here. And so, like, from that standpoint, like, the lack of communication with either customers or product management has been just detrimental to good launches, good bringing things to market and things like that.
Okay. Great. I'm going to cut it. I'm going to cut it there. Just to keep it moving. So this is an interesting question, which I've actually dealt with myself. So the question is, when you have a product launch for a B2B2C environment, when does the second B, so your customer that's paying, when do they get notified of the release? At the same time as the consumer, or in advance, or I dare say afterwards? Especially the CMT guys, you might have an opinion, but anybody else is welcome to jump into that.
Yeah, Emily, you want to take that one?
So typically we're informing our customers early and often about an upcoming release that's happening, and they tend to like to own the communication to their own user base. So we'll typically communicate with our B, and then give them messaging support to communicate then to their customers. And so I would say our launch package typically includes more, here's how to communicate and market this to your own customers rather than us going directly to those end users.
Great. Okay. Awesome. I will say that I've been in the same situation, and that's exactly what we did. So
what a relief.
There's a best practice for you.
Right.
Who'd like to take this one? How do you measure the success of a product, and when do you measure it? Like, at what point? And it's going to vary based on the product, but when's a good time to measure? Amanda, why do you? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm wondering if you have an opinion on that.
Well, I think part of the go-to-market process is really figuring out the answer to that question, right? Because I think it's going to depend who your buyer is, what your sales cycle looks like. Is this something that's entirely net new to the company? Is it a real departure from the audience you've been selling to before? I think all of those things are actually going to affect the answer. So I guess I'm giving you a non-answer answer, but I think that it's incumbent on the product marketer and product manager to really align on that. And as we've talked about, set those kind of key objectives early on and be aligned on that, because I think you could otherwise come up with wildly different answers.
Okay.
Yeah, just to jump in on that too. I think like sharing that with stakeholders too, like obviously the PMM and the product manager being aligned is great, but then you have to get everybody else internally to agree to the same stuff. Otherwise people will insert their own answer for what they define success to be. And that can be an interesting thing to try and play catch up on. So talk to each other, but then tell everybody else what your thought was on that.
Yes, for sure.
Okay, excellent. And what do you do when dates slip or things don't go as planned? Anybody want to comment on that?
Dates never slip.
Well, then there's that.
You'll be out on Tuesday. I'll take that one. I mean, I think it depends, right? There's sort of an adage we used to have about, like, is it slipping by more than the time remaining? right? That's usually a sign of how critical and potentially impactful it's going to be, right? If you have a week left and you're slipping a month, like that's bad for a lot of reasons. If it's, you have a month to go and you're slipping 3 days, like, depending on what's going on, there might be some things that have a long lead in marketing that you have to try and pull back or whatever, but it's less impactful, right? So I think a lot of that was largely on product management side to make sure that we had good fidelity into the engineering process and test and QA to have confidence that like things that were done were actually done. So we weren't getting any late surprises. And then obviously if anything was, looking a little shaky, we start communicating as quickly as we found out about it. But I think, dates move for all kinds of reasons. We could do a 2-hour talk on that, but I think when they do have to move for whatever reason, I think it's hopefully you've been doing enough good hygiene in your development process that you don't have the bad case where it's, a week left and you're slipping by a month type of thing, because that's kind of catastrophic, right? Usually it's just managing a little bit of movement. That's not that big, as long as you've been talking to each other.
Got it.
I think in product development, there's no such thing as good surprises. All surprises are bad surprises. So I like to preach to my product managers, like, please, let's be team no surprises. So when things look like they might be getting shaky, usually know early and you just don't want to tell yourself or don't want to tell your stakeholders. Tell yourself and tell your stakeholders so that the way you actually manage that slip is you're deciding if it's worth it to slip or to just go with what you've got, as opposed to saying, hey, we just simply can't do anything. We're totally hosed at this late stage of the game. So the only way to deal with that is just communicate the hell out of it, and you should be doing that anyway.
Great. Okay, well, I'd like to give our panelists a great round of applause. You've been fabulous. This has been really educational. I know I've learned a lot. I hope everybody that's participated and attended today has learned a lot as well. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Charlie. Now, one of the things I just want to quickly say is that we're going to be going into breakouts, and the breakouts are actually one of the best parts of these events. So I would really encourage you to stay around. This is a great way to connect with other folks and talk about some of the key issues that have already been discussed and more. So I'll hand it over to Charlie. Charlie?
All right. So thank you very much for attending. As Steve mentioned, we're about to have networking in groups of 4 to 6. There's a survey for this event. It's just 1 minute. It really helps us out. Let us know what we did well, what we could do in the future, what topics you'd like to see. So that link is in the chat and also in your email. And our next event, October 29th, is on continuous product discovery. So how to continually over time be looking for what is the next product to build, what are the next features to build, all of that. So at this time, we're going to start a 15-minute long breakout room and in a group of 4 to 6. We're going to do that 2 times. And if you want to leave after the first one, that's fine. And suggested topics are, what are your takeaways from this event? What ideas will you use in your work? And how do these 2 roles work together in your company? So at this time, if you're not planning to stick around for networking, please do exit the Zoom call. That'll help us make sure the groups are the right size. But if you are sticking around, we'll have breakout rooms in just a second. All right, you should have received an invite to a breakout room. You see a breakout room invite? Would you like to join it? Looks like you're in breakout room 2.